Welcome to Excelsior 32, the online news source for the Excelsior Project from the New York Council of Deliberation.
Myron Deputat is an engineer, scientist, musician, composer, and inner space explorer from Buffalo, New York. He has a Master's of Science in Electrical Engineering from SUNY Buffalo and has worked both as an electrical and sound recording engineer. He's currently a corporate engineer in charge of process design and control systems at Upstate Niagara Dairy Cooperative. He's also the leader of the polka rock band Those Idiots, which headlines Buffalo's Dingus Day, which celebrates every Monday after Easter. In the fall of 2001, after 9/11, Myron began his Masonic journey at Amherst Lodge number 981. As a lifelong learner, he joined the Valley of Buffalo in 2008 in search of further light, where he held the office of Most Worshipful Master 3 times and is currently the first lieutenant. During the recent COVID pandemic, Myron helped his lodge, as well as concordant and appendant bodies, embrace technology as a tool to continue their Masonic work. And as such, he has been able to take his Masonic journey around the globe, connecting and speaking with our Masonic brethren throughout the world. Today, he will share some of his methods and techniques that he has learned to effectively conduct both virtual and hybrid meetings. My brothers, please help me in welcoming Brother Myron Deputat.
Good morning, brethren. I am going to now attempt to share my screen, so hopefully we won't have any difficulty there. And all right, this morning we are going to be speaking about virtual and hybrid meetings and how to effectively use technology in helping bring our brothers closer together. A few of the things that we're going to cover, we're going to first go over some of the technical requirements, the types of software available, what this whole thing bandwidth is all about, and then key things that are important: audio, video, and lighting. Then we're going to touch briefly on how to effectively communicate to your brethren so that they know how to actually get online and participate within the meeting. Then we'll go over a few items such as conducting a meeting virtually and a hybrid meeting, what protocols seem to work, the roles of somebody like a Tyler and a secretary and the tools that would help them, hosting, and also things like voting. And then we'll also touch upon presentations and live events. And when you're having meetings, obviously you do some presenting or would like to show some live things. And there are some nuances to doing so. How do you properly share your screens, the slides, the best way of presenting them, the issue with images and copyrights and fair use, streaming, recording, and video, and then also multicam events where you've got multiple cameras doing things. So we're going to jump right into it with the technical requirements. The first thing you've got to do is select what type of software you want to use in order to enable a collaborative meeting online. There are probably now well over 15 to 20 packages out there and different systems available for doing live meetings with audio and video. If we go back 10, 15 years ago, the field was really not that advanced yet. And there were whiteboards and things, but it really came out of audio conferencing that this slowly developed. But in recent years, we've seen a plethora, especially with the pandemic, really requiring us to advance our technology in this direction. One of the leaders has been obviously Zoom, which we're using now. Other notable software packages are things like Microsoft Teams, Cisco WebEx, Google Meet, FaceTime, Intermedia. They all have various pros and cons. There are various costs involved with some of them as well, depending on what your requirements are. If you're just having a quick meeting with officers or a small group, you might get away with something like a FaceTime or a Google Meet type of thing. Uh, if you need something more advanced, though, a Cisco WebEx or Microsoft Teams is often used in the corporate world because it's also easy to share documents and display things that way. Zoom seems to have become, though, the platform of choice for holding web presentations and larger type of groups. And it happens to be something that has been adopted quite well within Masonry, at least within New York State, and actually nationally and internationally. I've been on quite a few meetings. So we're going to focus mainly on Zoom today, though these other software packages are out there and there may be better ones in the future. A new one that I've yet to look at, but it's started to cause some stir, is a package called Intermedia. And the costs vary. The one thing that you need to take into account with a Zoom meeting is if you're going to require something more than 40 minutes, you've got to upgrade from the free account and pay the $150 a year for the first tier, which allows you unlimited time and I believe up to 100 participants. We in our lodge and also at our valley have just said this is now part of something that we are going to budget for, and it's a tool that we use. So we have an account with each of them, and it does come in handy in a number of fashions. Even when regulations have allowed us to meet in person, we've still taken advantage of these packages, and we'll explain how we do that later. So moving on, when we talk about you sending data across the internet, we're looking at live video and audio. It typically takes, if you take a still image, your image based on the quality can be anywhere from a few, even kilobytes if it's a GIF, up to a few megabytes, or if it's high quality, a gigabyte. But when you're talking about video, you have basically multiple images, 15, 30, 60 per second, that are being transferred. So you need to look at what is the speed requirement, and speed on the internet is measured right now in megabits per second. 1 million bits of data per second. Now, bits are ones and zeros for those who aren't real in the computer programming world, but it's everything is encoded. So when we digitize any picture, any piece of audio, it's all translated mathematically into ones and zeros. And all of that has to be transferred over the internet. So we're talking about millions of bits per second in order to send them across. Now, when you get your internet service providers providing you service to your facilities or to your homes, you're typically given both an upload and a download speed. On Verizon Fios, you really don't have issues because it can be up to a gigabyte up and down, which is 1,000 megabytes per second. So but when you have something like Time Warner or others, depending on the level that you choose, you might only have 1.5 or 2 megabits per second upload, though usually we all have at least 50 download, and that's because there are restrictions for uploading data. If you want to upload video, you need to look at certain requirements. At our valley, we actually had a DSL connection, which was even worse. We finally did upgrade it because of streaming requirements. And you have to remember that it's kind of like the image shows, it's a pipe, and there's only so much water or so much data you can fit through that pipe. And if you need a bigger pipe, then you can put more through. Now, depending on the type of video you're using, you've heard of standard def and then high def video, and then there's 4K now. Standard def, they basically say it's 480 or 720 or 1080. What it is the number of lines or pixels that you see in a vertical side. So the screen is broken up into ones and zeros, and there are dimensions on the screen, and there are aspect ratios. All these, if you get into it, they're highly technical. But the big thing that you need to understand is the resolution of the image, as we know when you look at a 4K television, either gets much clearer or much lower, but the information that's being sent can only be sent based on whatever resolution you have a camera capable of using, and you need to make a decision as to what resolution is best for you based on the speed capability that you have. So standard definition video, which is what typically, if you're looking at a lot of YouTube videos and things, they're really mostly in standard def, and the upload speed requirement is 1 megabit per second and 0.6 megabits per second download. When you get into what's now become pretty much common is high def, you're looking at the 720p range, which now you're at 2.6 megabits per second upload and 1.8 download. If you get into full HD, which is a 1080p thing, now you're at 3.8 megabits per second upload and 3 megabits per second download. When you get to 4K, it gets higher still. All of this, sounds really interesting, but the other thing you need to take into account is wherever you're located, your bandwidth that you have coming into your facility, which is the maximum amount of speed you're capable of doing in an ideal situation, is also split up between any other device you might have on your network. So if you've got home automation, that takes part of it. If you've got multiple people at home all connected with their phones onto your Wi-Fi network, and people are chatting and streaming video at the same time that you're online listening to a presentation or presenting, that all takes a section of that pipe. So your actual speed is going to vary based on the number of devices that you have connected to your network.
Hey, Myron, this is Bob Siebold. We got a question. It says, this is from Harry Williams.
Yes.
What about using a hotspot on my cell phone? How does that affect bandwidth?
Well, your hotspot is going to, your cell phone is going to have its own bandwidth that it has based on your cell phone provider, whether you're on a 4G LTE or 5G, whatever the maximum throughput that your provider is giving you. So if you're connected with a hotspot to your phone, as long as you know what the speed ratio is from your provider, then you can easily use that and not have anyone else on it. But again, though I've found over time that sometimes depending on how close you are to a tower, you get either more or less throughput. There's actually a great website that you can test your connection with. It's basically it's speedtest.org. If you go to that website on any device and click go, it will actually give you a live speed rating so you know exactly how fast your connection is. What we can actually do, I'll continue with the presentation, but remind me at the end, and I'll then share a web page, and we'll go to that site because that probably would be interesting, and we can do a speed test live. But that's actually a great way of testing what your bandwidth is. And that way, you know, with your hotspot, typically you're the only one linked to it, so it wouldn't affect other devices. But again, your phone is, if it's providing the hotspot, whatever it's doing is also connected. The big thing here is when we're getting into, especially later on when we get into hybrid meetings, we're going to talk about the necessity of having multiple devices connected, and this is where bandwidth comes in. The other thing, interesting thing about bandwidth is it's not just a restriction on your end going in and out of the internet, but the servers that provide the software service, such as Zoom or Microsoft, they have incredible bandwidth on their end, terabits per second, but there is a limit as well. And they throttle back different connections, basically giving your particular session a certain amount of data width because they're paying for that as well. And you need to take into account that the number of people who are streaming video or audio at the same time, that's all going to the server and then coming back down to everybody else. And the server then has to also organize all of that, which is why when we're doing things, we ask that everybody mutes their audio and shuts off their video, because it prevents us from using up that entire pipe. The more people that get on, it's like clogging a freeway. Everyone gets in the way. Therefore, it really doesn't matter how fast your personal connection is. Really, the limitation is on the provider's end. And there are providers who, based on how much you pay for your service, will limit your bandwidth speeds. And that's where it gets into, there are tiers in Zoom and in other applications where you can have up to 1,000 members or 5,000 people for a webinar or things. That is, you're paying for bandwidth. That's why they have those requirements, because they have to pass on their costs. And if everyone could have unlimited bandwidth, that'd be great. I'm sure people are working on faster and faster technologies. Let's move on to the next topic, audio. First thing, when we look at audio, you look at microphones and speakers, headsets, earbuds. It is the way that these transducers are basically encoding this information that we hear and putting it into a digital form. The quality of what you use has a direct impact on the quality of the sound that you are going to reproduce and hear. There are a number of types of microphones. Now, you can use the microphone that's built into a laptop or built into your phone, and they've improved quite a bit. So for a simple meeting, there's nothing wrong with that. But what you'll find is that if you use a higher quality type of microphone, you will get a much better quality of audio. In the recording environment in the studio, we know this all the time. We use $20,000 microphones sometimes on somebody's voice because it just picks them up that much better. And when you're recording somebody, those are real concerns. But when you're doing a presentation, it also makes a difference. Now, there are a lot of options. Currently, there are some good options. Blue makes a Yeti microphone, and this morning I learned from Peter about the Rode Mini Mic, which is another USB microphone. These microphones are in the $100 to $150, $200 range, but they're really very close to studio quality microphones. You can either use wired USB or Bluetooth connections with some of these microphones. Now, a wired connection means you're actually taking a audio wire and plugging it into the headphone and microphone port on your computer or laptop, whatever device you're using, or it could be your iPad. That means that the computer or your iPad is actually doing the process of encoding the audio with its chips, its codecs. When you use a USB powered device or a Bluetooth powered device, what is happening is The audio encoding is actually not being done by your computer, but it's being done within that device. So a USB microphone like the Blue will actually encode the audio and then send it to the computer in a digital form. It takes care of some of the processing, but the manufacturers are able then also to put in some software into that to help reduce background noise, to improve upon clarity of diction and things like that. Now, a headset microphone is something that is commonly used in all types of environments, and it allows for the microphone to be closer to the point of speech where it's picking up the sound and gives you freedom of movement with your hands, but it means that if you turn your head, you're still going to sound the same. It's a popular approach, especially when you're speaking a lot. And although technology these days has really improved to the desktop environment, but now when you're in a larger environment where you have multiple people in a single room, you're going to want to look at something that's more like a conference room style mic. You can Polycom and US Robotics and others, they have multiple style conference room mics. The one I'm using actually today is by a company called Skywin, and it's only $40 on Amazon, 45. But that connects via Bluetooth, and it's rechargeable, so you can go into any small room, put it in the middle of the room, and be connected, and suddenly everybody in that room can speak. The issue that you need to worry about, though, when you're doing things that are wireless is latency. Now, what latency is it's the amount of time that it takes for the audio to be processed and then actually to be sent over the airwaves, let's say, and then recorded or transmitted. When in the recording studio environment, that's a big issue, especially when people are trying to hear themselves at the same time over a set of headphones. And really anything over about 4 or 5 milliseconds becomes unbearable for a lot of performers. They hear like this double echo because you hear yourself and then hear something else. When we're not concerned with that per se, then it doesn't become as much of an issue here, though what you might find is if you have some real poor latency, the sound that you hear is going to come across slightly delayed from the actual video. And you'll see that also based on some bandwidth issues and other things. So it's something to take into account. A lot of manufacturers today have really worked on upping their game in terms of processing, and there's now Bluetooth 5.0, and all these things improve upon the latency issue. Now, when it comes to speakers, you can use speakers, headphones, earbuds. A lot of laptop speakers these days have really been upgraded and sound quite good. But if you're in a larger environment where you have 10 people, 20 people, your laptop isn't going to be loud enough. So you're going to need to use some type of amplified system. Using a set of speakers ends up being nice because you can make it loud enough for everybody in the room to hear. Again, you can plug that into your device using a little wired jack, or you can connect USB or Bluetooth speakers. Again, if you're doing Bluetooth, you need to worry about that delay because every time you have something wireless, you're adding a little extra delay. It's not instant. But on the other hand, you do get that amplification. In our particular lodge room at our valley, we have a Bluetooth connection available, but it's because of the distance of where we put our computer and video devices versus where it sits in the closet, the delay is unbearable, so we don't use it for our virtual or hybrid meetings. The use of headphones they're a great way of isolating sound and getting rid of background noise, also removing bleed if you're speaking, but they're particular good, especially if you're in an environment where you don't necessarily want other people in your environment to hear what you're listening to. Uh, let's say you're at home and you got the kids and the wife, you can kind of be isolated. With, and in addition, earbuds kind of work the same way. They're nice because they're wireless. But with headphones, there are two types. They're something called open and closed back. And the closed back headphones basically seal everything off so you can't hear the environment around you. Where open back, if someone was really close to your ears, they could hear what a little bit of what you're hearing, but it allows you to hear the ambient noise around you. There are also noise canceling headphones, which have gotten really good, as well as the earbuds. If you're trying to isolate yourself completely, they're great options for you as an individual taking part. But obviously, they're not going to work if you're doing a group meeting where everyone needs to hear. We'll move on to video now. With video, the common way that we capture video is through something called a webcam. There are a number of different options out there, especially since the pandemic. Manufacturers really have, again, done a lot of innovation, and they've done a lot with webcams. I'll just, as a side note, you don't necessarily need to use a webcam, though. If you really go through it, you could get a video encoder like they used to in the old days and use video cameras. And there are ways of capturing video into a computer system. The key thing is once it's in a digital format, that's when Zoom and other packages can take advantage of the video to use it. But when you're looking at a webcam, per se, you want to look first at the resolution. Is it a 480p? Is it a 720? They've even got 4K webcams. The key thing there is the higher the resolution, even though you might not be transmitting your video at the highest resolution, the better the quality that the camera can record in means you'll have a better image. You'll have more information for the software to be able to kind of shrink it down to whatever size it needs. So you'll get a better picture. And the other thing that you need to look at is how it's going to perform in low light. And we'll get into lighting in a bit. But typically the darker your environment gets, the camera can't see like the eye and see and react as easily. And you'll get noise that comes into the picture. It looks like grainy images. So seeing how the camera reacts to low light, and in the old days we used to give them lux ratings, which is what a video camera, a zero lux video camera was very good in low light, meaning it wasn't as grainy. But the lower the light is, the more muted your colors are and other things. Another thing to look at is your field of view. A typical camera on a phone or on your laptop is going to be a 90-degree field of view, meaning from that point out, if you were to draw a 90-degree angle, that's going to be the cone basically that it sees of your video. But there are different lenses available that can go up to 100, 120, 150 degrees of view. There are some cameras that even will give you the option with special software of doing a 360 degree field of view. And those are interesting. The other thing you want to look at is the frame rate that your cameras can use. 30 frames per second is probably the standard of what most video is shown at online. But if you are showing fewer frames, some cameras, they look jittery because they don't go at 30 frames per second. They might be at 15 or even less. It means they use less data, but you're basically slowing down the number of images that you have. Modern television here in the US uses 60 frames per minute. And your high def screens can show 120 or 200, can show 120 or 240 frames per second. So you don't get the blur and things when you're getting into 4K. It's not as important for a webinar, but it's something to take into consideration. Also, some of these cameras have good built-in microphones. And instead of purchasing a separate microphone, you may want to look at options like that. On this slide, I'm showing you some of the types of cameras that are available. Logitech has been a very good company in terms of putting out some really high quality webcams that are integrated. The Logi Mini or the C920 shown below. Also, they've got the Brio 4K. They're all very highly rated and they're usually quite good quality. You can get, I'm not a proponent necessarily for Logitech, but I've also bought some cheap, $30 webcams off of Amazon, and you see a difference in the quality and in how it handles lighting. Amazon's or Logitech's quality has been quite good. Another company, this is a personal camera that I use for a lot of things, is from a company called Zoom. It's the Q2N 4K. Now, this particular camera, what's nice about it is it also has a built-in stereo condenser microphone, which is a style of microphone, but you can use it as a webcam for streaming. It's designed really more for audio, video type purposes for musicians to record their performances, but you can change your field of view, and you can actually record to a built-in, you can put an SD memory card into it, so you can record what you're filming at the same time as it's streaming over to your computer. It turns out to be a great device, and the microphone on it is fantastic, so it picks up the clarity really well. Another interesting camera here is by J5 Create. This camera, I mentioned 360 degrees. I did buy this camera. As a webcam itself, it's not the highest quality, but that head actually will turn 90 degrees and go flat. And this, through its software, you can have up to a 360-degree field of view. And it spreads out that image so that everybody in the room can be seen. And you can also, through software, have it where it picks up the speaker and highlights that speaker into the center. So it's kind of cool, and it shows where technology is going. You'll be able to, I'm sure this technology will improve over the years. You'd be able to set one of these up on a tripod in the middle of a room, and suddenly everybody in your lodge room could be seen. So that's really interesting stuff. Next thing we want to talk about is lighting, though. With video, just as in the eye, the more light you get around, the easier it is to see. A lot of times, the lighting, natural lighting that we have in rooms is not enough to get a good quality picture. So hence the low light capabilities of webcams. But you can improve upon that a lot by using some external lighting. And you don't have to go all out like I've done in some places with, photography lights or stage lighting. But you can, for relatively little amounts of money, get yourself some personal lighting in your environment if you're doing something from home for a virtual meeting. I have, as you've shown here on the left, these are from Newer, available on Amazon. They're little desk lamps that you put on tripods, and they're powered by USB, and you can change your coloring. I'm using one right now actually on my left side, which helps fill in some of the color variation that you see. And then I've got another light, which is really just the desk lamp here on the right side. And by shining the image, more light on the front of your face, it helps bring your image forward, and then that way things in the background won't get in the way. And when you get into using green screen, and we can touch on green screen and some of those things later, but if you're trying to use a background image like I am right now, by having more light on yourself, it helps. Also, if you're in a lodge environment, a lot of times people think, well, if I can see it in the room, that's enough light. Well, it turns out it isn't. A lot of times, I know from my musical experience when we've performed a lot and we've tried to record things and do live streams with the band, the lighting that people see on stage may look great in a club, but when you start using cameras, it's just not enough light. So a lot of times you need to really improve the amount of light that you have so that cameras can pick up all those details. They're not as good as our eyes. They're limited with the technology that's out there. They get better over time, but they're still not as good. So using external lighting helps quite a bit. The device on the right is something called a ring light. Now these, you can get expensive ones, but you can now even go to Ollie's or Burlington or some of these places, and for about $10, you can pick up an LED. $10 to $15, you can pick up an LED ring light. What's nice about these is you can actually put your webcam or your device right in the center of this light. And as it's shining on you, and you can increase or decrease the brightness, it gives you kind of a full field of light without being overpowering, and allows your device to be right in the center. They're quite useful. I have one set up at home, and it does make a difference. So investing a little bit in that in your home environment makes a lot of sense. Within your lodge room, you want to again make sure if you're doing something in a lodge or in a meeting hall and you're using live video there, that you try to increase the light. Even if you're using something like some additional standing lamps or work lights, that if you typically you don't want the light to be facing you, you would like to diffuse it so it doesn't make things harsh, but you can bounce light off of walls and things and enhance the video that people see. All right, we're going to move on to communication. We talk about communication often, but what's important when communicating with your members about a virtual or a hybrid meeting is having proper instructions on how to log in. You typically we use email, mail, or text, but you want to make sure that the link and the meeting codes and things that you put in there are accurate. I've had a couple of times where the secretary used an old meeting code, and half of the meeting, brothers are spending time texting the secretary, texting other people, trying to figure out how to get in. There's nothing more frustrating than setting aside time wanting to get into something and not being able to get into it, and you're sitting there saying, oh, how do I get in? Why is this not working? And it interrupts also the meeting, and really it's very important that everybody knows how to get in and that you have accurate links. Within Zoom, you can send an invitation link, you can copy and paste it in. Make sure you do that as opposed to just trying to type it all out yourself, because we're going to make mistakes. You're going to miss a number or do something and it's not going to work, and you're going to have frustrated members. Make sure that you have someone assigned to be a technical assistance help lead, somebody who, and you can designate it in the email. If you're having difficulty, brothers, please contact so-and-so at such and such number. This way, the people who are running the meeting aren't sitting there working on helping somebody get online, but now you've got somebody designated who is actually working on this behind the scenes. Another thing is there's voice conferencing always as an option. So within Zoom, we have phone numbers you can call into. When we do hybrid meetings, and we'll talk about that shortly here as well, some of our members don't have computers, but they still want to take part. So make sure that they have the option of calling in. The key thing there is when they do call in, you need to, at the beginning of your meeting, if you recognize that there's a phone number, ask them to identify themselves. And then whoever's running that meeting can go in and rename the person so that everybody knows who it is. There are a lot of tools to set up communications automatically to get things out. MailChimp is great for sending out mass emails. PhoneVite is a great way of sending out a voice message to brothers. Again, we want to use as many forms of communication at once to really get participation. So with PhoneVites, you can set up a voice message that comes from a known number. It would come from a member who's using it. In that PhoneVite, you can give an address of where they can go to just go online to find the link information instead of giving the whole link. But you can also just give the phone number, especially for those older brothers who just want to call in. That becomes important. EasyTexting.com is another service that I've used, which is fantastic. It's free for up to, I think, 100 texts. I think you can do 2 to 4 mass texts at a time per month for free. And it allows you to send text messages to all of your brethren who have cell phones. So you can send out one text with links and everything else right from your computer, and it works as a great for a group texting option. Sometimes if you're having difficulty because of bandwidth issues for audio, we've actually set up a small conference room speaker at our meeting, at our executive board meeting room at our Valley, and Magic Jack has actually a free conference calling number. If you dial this number 305-848-8888, even without having a Magic Jack account, you can set up a conference call and set up a code and give out the number to all of your brethren. And there is no time limit, and it works great for allowing those brothers who are having difficulty with things like Zoom and others to just be able to call in and have a regular old voice conference call. So it's an option for you to consider. All right, conducting a meeting. The first question you have to ask yourself is this going to be fully virtual or hybrid? And what do we mean by hybrid? When we're fully virtual, that means every single person is going to be connected through technology. Nobody is going to be meeting in person. Hybrid means that some of the people are going to actually be there in person, but we're going to allow others to connect through technology. What helps you make those decisions? Well, health concerns is number one. That's what we've been dealing with. Things such as COVID and, or in the future, it may be something else, and there may be brethren who can't come because of their own health issues, such as a broken leg or something else. Another item you want to take into account are weather conditions, especially in New York State, especially where I'm from, Buffalo, and I know Syracuse and other places. We sometimes get these things called snowstorms, and all of a sudden it's a mad dash. Well, a lot of times in the past we've canceled meetings. Now we can virtually connect and everybody can get together that way. So it becomes a very nice option to allow us to still meet. Another thing to consider, not necessarily for a stated community meeting or a lodge meeting, but if you're doing something like an officers meeting, you might want to take into account travel time. A lot of times, I know in some parts of the state, brethren have to travel an hour to 2 hours sometimes just to get together for an officers meeting. Well, now that we have this technology, an officer who can get online and either virtually or in a hybrid fashion participate and still do something allows them to participate and save all that time. And I know with a lot of younger members, they've got families and wives saying, oh, you have to go again, and it causes some issues. It's a lot easier if they can say, oh, I'm going to go into my office for an hour, but they're still at home. It's a great way to keep things friendly and allow them to have time to come to those events that are really critical. One thing to also consider is if you're having a guest speaker, sometimes bringing a guest speaker in person is great, but if you don't necessarily have the ability to bring somebody in, say from across the country, you can now virtually or in a hybrid fashion even have a guest speaker be a part of your meeting. So that enables you to invite people from literally all over the world. And you can, many speakers are willing to do so without even any cost to your group. So therefore, where in the past you would have to get a hotel room, flights, and accommodations, now you can simply ask that person to get online for an hour or so and give their presentation. It's become a wonderful tool. Things to consider when conducting your meeting virtually or in hybrid form. Is it going to be a tiled or open meeting? That's number one. If this is just if you're doing something that's an open event and you've got a guest speaker and you're not doing anything Masonic that requires voting or talking about things that shouldn't be talked about outside the craft, then you can simply make an open meeting that anybody can become a part of. But anything more really requires that you tile the meeting. And how do you tile the meeting? You can require pre-registration, but by setting up on Zoom that everyone comes into a waiting room, you typically want to assign somebody as the tiler, whether it's your actual tiler or somebody who is going to work in that fashion. Now on Zoom, in order to do so, you need to make people co-hosts. So you identify somebody who's going to be the co-host, and that person would be your tiler. And a lot of times, I know Rick and I have been in meetings, and I will act as the secretary tiler, and I know who's supposed to be coming in. And as people come into the waiting room, I send messages and ask them to rename their screen so we know who it is, and then you admit them one by one. In that fashion, you're able to make sure that everybody who's supposed to be there is supposed to be there. And that becomes very important, especially when it comes to voting. Typically, you want to make sure you've got a clear set agenda, as you do in any meeting, but it's always advantageous to have some things that you can share on a screen where you can show the agenda to everybody who is present. And by sharing that on a screen, it helps keep everyone in check. You're going to look at the duration of your meeting, and that becomes more critical if you're on a time crunch depending on your account or the type of system you're using. But it's still always good to keep things within a certain time frame, because I've been on some Zoom meetings where they last all day and then people take breaks for lunch and things. So you need to look at that. Again, designating co-hosts so that in addition to just a tiler, you want to think about what other things you're going to need. You might want to have someone else as a co-host as well, who's your technical assistance person. That person can, through chats, can go in and help people with issues that they're having with their sound or their video. You want to be able to have that person rename people, and if you find someone who is a Cowan or eavesdropper or somebody who is disturbing things, you can actually send them back to the waiting room. The waiting room is a great place to kind of move things in and out. It's important to instruct everybody on the use of a chat room, the difference between private messages and general messages for everyone. You want to be able to send things to everybody, but you can actually allow, within Zoom, there are a number of features that you can enable or disable, but the allowing of using a chat room for private messages, do you want sidebar things going on or not? Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. I think personally it's good to be able to have that to a degree, because it prevents some brothers from you know, unmuting their mic and talking to somebody that they haven't seen for a while. You know, I've been on some meetings that way, and it's nice that they like to reconnect, but using the chat room is a great way. And then do you allow sharing of files? Files can be shared within the chat room. It's what's important is whoever is your secretary for this particular meeting, make sure that they save the chat window at the end, because that comes through as a text file, and it's great for checking with your notes and making sure you've got everything. And which is why also on the other side I show signing into the chat window. Whenever you have a meeting, it's always a good policy to have everybody who attends sign in and say where they're from, just so that that becomes a record. It's much easier for the secretary later to be able to say this is who has attended. Require the use of proper names so that it doesn't just show up. Some people have as their Zoom name their company or something, some other acronym. When they're speaking or asking questions, then you're like, well, who are you? Identify yourself. Closed captioning is an option within Zoom through some add-ins, and really it's a transcription service, and it works quite well. I've tested it. If you're recording a meeting for a secretary's purpose, you can actually do closed captioning, and it's quite good. The software will actually, on the bottom of the screen, type the text as you speak. So this way, within a meeting, you actually can see everything that's going on. We'll jump here to auto mute and auto disable video. When you set up your Zoom session, you can set up preferences, and some of the preferences that I typically set up is I set up that everyone who enters in to the meeting is automatically muted and automatically their video is disabled. That prevents you from having issues with bandwidth, where if somebody is entering in late, they don't come in and all of a sudden you hear background noise disturbing things. So it's just good practice. In order to share screens, a lot of times you need to make somebody a co-host in order to do so. So that's something to keep in mind when you're using a presenter.
Hey, Myron, we got a question from Bill Toth. He said, how do you designate a co-host? And if Myron doesn't mention how to do it, can he show us at the end of his presentation how to actually do that?
Yeah, a real simple way of designating a co-host. First, you need to make sure within Zoom, there's a option in your settings to allow for co-hosts. So in your account that you're using, you need to allow for co-hosts. And then within the participants window, you'll see 3 little dots by each person's name. When you click on that, as long as you've allowed the enabling of co-hosts, you see make co-host or make host. If you select the option for that person, make co-host, that will give them the ability to assist you with all of these things. It's a very simple thing to do. I know Rick and I discovered it as we were doing a number of our sessions over the last couple of years, and it's proven to be a really valuable tool. So make sure you enable it first, and then you go in the chat window. And if you go online and do a Google search, Zoom, search Google on Google search Zoom, make co-host, you'll find a step-by-step instruction on how to do it. That's how we discovered how to do it. Recording. A lot of times, today we're recording this event, but when you're especially when you have presenters, you're dealing with copyrighted material, and we'll get into that later. The presenter may or may not want to allow recording of what they're presenting. You need to make sure that that is something that you clear with everybody. And if you are recording, you need to make sure that everybody who is online on your meeting is aware that this event is being recorded, because there are some people who maybe don't want to have their image or their voice recorded. I've come across that. There are some brothers who don't like to be in pictures for whatever their personal reasons are. That you need to respect that. So at least if you let everybody know that that's happening in advance, then and you can even put that in your messages when you're announcing your event that it will or will not be recorded. Sometimes you don't want to do that because some brothers will say, "Oh, it's being recorded. I can watch it whenever." But I also often get requests for recordings after the fact if there was an interesting presenter, and a lot of times we just don't record because of some of the copyright issues, but we'll get into that. And then finally, the secretary, whoever that secretary is, they're going to be taking minutes for the meeting. Whatever you can do to help them is important. When people are logging into your Zoom, usually we get emails for that on the host account. It's good to send that to the secretary just to keep track of who's who. All right, hybrid meetings. What are you going to need that's different for a hybrid meeting than a full virtual meeting? You're going to need some type of device for people to interact with, whether it's a projector or a monitor. Over at our valley, the Valley of Buffalo, we actually have a brother donated a large screen, 46-inch flat screen TV, which we have on a cart. And we set up a laptop next to it and our camera and speakers, and it's almost as though somebody is in the lodge room with us. And what the best quality that you can afford to put in, that's what you put in without being obtrusive. Nowadays, large screen TVs have gotten so inexpensive, and you don't necessarily need a 4K, the best thing. You can get something that for a few $100s that's large and light and is easy to bring into the lodge room and set up on a stand. And that really enables you to do that within if you're doing an officers meeting, having a monitor, a large monitor, or again, a large screen TV brought in allows people to come in and do video conferencing. On a corporate level, we've got boardrooms now and office room or meeting rooms where there are all kinds of high-tech large screens and cameras and systems. You can spend a fortune on that stuff, but you don't need to. And in our particular case, this allows us to roll the screen in and enable it for the part of the meeting where we allow everybody to come in. You're going to want to have a good speaker and a good microphone. Again, you need something that everybody can hear. The speakers on this particular television aren't bad, and we've used that, but we've also used other speakers, sometimes having a speaker that is louder. I personally, with sound engineering stuff, have professional amplification systems, PA systems that are even wireless, and you bring one of those in and it just sounds that much better. The better that it sounds, the easier it is for people to understand and the easier it is for people to interact. One of the things to take into account in a hybrid meeting are multiple devices. Now, this becomes kind of critical. When you have your system set up, you're going to have one laptop or some device set up as your master Zoom meeting, which is going to have a camera that is showing a partial view of the room. And it's also going to have the microphone connected to it, but you're going to want to have, for a secretary and or a tiler, separate devices where they can control and deal with things in the chat room, deal with admitting people into the waiting room. What I've found is using my handy dandy iPhone or an iPad or an Android phone, you can have somebody else connect. But it's important, again, for bandwidth issues, number one, to disable video on that device. Number two, not only do you want to mute the microphone, but there's an option on the device within Zoom on those devices to shut off the speakers. And that is the most critical part, because what you'll get is you get audio feedback. What happens is if you have multiple speakers in a room, the microphone starts picking up. There's some canceling that goes on within the software of the microphone with the local speaker. So it's not the microphone that I'm speaking on now is not being retransmitted back into my speaker. If it was, I'd be getting a feedback issue. And you hear that sometimes in uh, with PA systems and things where the speaker picks up the microphone. That's called feedback, and it makes this loud noise. When somebody puts on a speaker on a separate device, suddenly what's happening is that microphone is feeding back with that speaker. And so you get this echoing, and it makes it very difficult for everybody to hear. So it's important that whatever devices are connecting within the same room or the same building, even, that they disable the actual speaker on that device, so that this way there is no feedback. I've found that even on my iPhone, if I put the volume all the way down to zero, it's not enough. There's still just an inherent amount that it picks up. So within Zoom, they've added this ability to mute your speaker. You need to do that. That's critical so that you don't have audio issues.
Hey, Myron, I got another question for you from Bill Toth. So I guess if
Yes.
you're going to have a hybrid meeting, are there ways to do voting in a hybrid or a virtual environment that you can talk
Yeah.
about?
Oh, yeah. I didn't touch on. We'll touch on that in just a second. We'll circle back to that in just a second here. Restricting the view of the ritual is key. We are not allowed to show any video of any of our rituals. In New York State, you're not allowed to do it, or we don't do it within Scottish Rite. We can't. That's just something that we don't do. So the positioning of your camera is important, but typically what we do within a lodge room environment is we will open, and after opening, we then allow hybrid participants to join, and then they leave prior to closing. This way, no ritual comes into the field of view. The other important thing is in New York State, we are not allowed to show the Bible and the square and compasses upon the altar. So you need to make sure that your camera does not have that in the field of view, because potentially somebody could see the position of the square and compasses or something. So we simply have, there's a rule that was made to never show the Bible on the altar. You cannot show that within your Zoom issue. I have here bandwidth issues. Again, this is where multiple devices, as you're adding devices, and sometimes brethren who come into your lodge room will have their phones automatically connected to the local to your Wi-Fi. If you start getting choppy video, it's most likely because a number of your brothers have their devices connected into your Wi-Fi. So you need to ask them to disable that or put their phones in airplane mode, so that this way you're limiting that and your upload and download bandwidth is resolved. Let's come back now into voting. A couple of things with virtual meetings. A lot of times with voting on simple votes, in a lodge where we're saying all those in favor vote by the ancient sign of a master mason while at work, opposed like sign. You're counting those brothers showing that sign. Well, you're not going to be able to necessarily see that when you're trying to do that virtually, especially if you've got people having their video off. So typically what we'll do in that particular environment is say, all those in favor stay silent. Opposed, please speak up. So this way, you give it a few minutes. If somebody has an issue with, is opposed to that which they're doing, they'll say nay. And so you say, all those in favor stay silent, opposed say nay, and they'll unmute themselves and say nay. At that point, you can then ask for a hand vote. Within Zoom, there is a voting icon where you can raise your hand or vote. You can use that to actually do a vote count, and that becomes something that then the secretary, which is why you want co-hosts, because the secretary would then take a look at that tally within that virtual meeting. In a hybrid meeting, when you're doing something in a hybrid fashion, you would use a similar approach. Again, because it's hybrid, instead of all those show the sign, you're going to again say all those in favor stay silent, opposed say nay. And therefore, everybody in the room has that option, and you, likewise on the screen. And 90% of the time, we know a lot of the motions and things that are made in a meeting, such as paying the bills or doing things. 90% of the time, they're unanimous. But there are those times where you do have nay votes, and so you give those opportunities for those brothers to say things. If you needed a vote count, though, you can again see the count of hands, and then you need to be cognizant and give the secretary time to get the vote count. So it's always important in that moment to say, brother secretary, have you gotten the vote count? Please give the result. And that way you avoid any misconceptions. There is something that you cannot do on Zoom, and that is balloting. Balloting is something that you need to do in person. And so those are some of the limitations with hybrid meetings, that whenever you're doing something where brethren have to ballot, it has to be done in person. And secret ballots, there are no ways of doing those as of yet on technology. So we simply don't do them. Hopefully that answers that question. All right, just a couple more slides here, brother, and then we can get to open Q&A. Presentations and live events. Issues with sharing screens. A lot of times presenters who are presenting virtually or hybrid and they're online, they might have issues with the software they're using and getting Zoom to work. It's always key to test prior to the event with your presenter. I know on some really large conferences, we actually had for 2 weeks a couple of test sessions where all of the presenters came on and tested their slides and things that they were presenting to make sure there wouldn't be issues. I've done presentations where I've had embedded audio and embedded video. So it's important to test that in advance to see how is that going to come through on a streaming service such as Zoom. When you talk about audio, if you're using music, you have to enable within your hosting account settings for stereo audio if you want people to be able to hear in stereo. When you're looking at video in the live stream, you want to be cognizant of what is the quality of the video that you're sending over. If it's high def, you're going to need to throttle it back for some of these things. You also want to look at copyrights and images. There are presenters, myself included, who a lot of times won't give permission to record a presentation because the images that they've used within their presentation are copyrighted images. And they don't have access for those in order to be able to sell their things. On the other hand, if you're not paying the presenter, and if you are not ever making any money off of a particular event presentation, there is something called fair use copyright law. It is set up for educational institutions and nonprofits specifically for the purpose of education. If you have an image, and there are some guidelines, if you go to the US Copyright Office online, they have guidelines for understanding how to use this. But a lot of times you can use images in a fair use system, which allow you to show them for presentation for the purpose of education. If you're not going out and selling that presentation or putting those things into a book and making money off of it, and if your organization is not charging for an event, then that becomes something that you can do. I've been on some webinars though where you pay $20 to be a part of that webinar because you're interested in the information. They won't allow the recording there because it's going to infringe upon the copyrights, and the images necessarily aren't owned by the author. And it becomes difficult and expensive if you need to sit there and create all of your own images. So I understand why a lot of presenters will use things or pictures that they find online. And it's all well and good as long as we keep in mind the legalities of it. For our purposes here, this is all educational and we don't charge for this. So that's why we're recording today. And you can go down the rabbit hole with copyrights and recordings, and we're not going to go into all the details. It's just something to be cognizant of. Now with live events, typically with a live event, you could set up one camera and have that. Over the last year, I've had the opportunity to be at 3 lodge rededications, and at 2 of them I organized with one of our Scottish Rite brethren and helped out the lodges by doing a multi-camera live streaming of the event, because you want to make sure that the events are allowed to be recorded. These were public installations, so they were, and so by using something called OBS Studio, it's an open broadcast service, streaming service system. You can have multiple cameras from multiple sources, USB cameras or HDMI cameras, and literally you're setting up a small video studio on a laptop. And that's then OBS Studio, for instance, is a free version. You can get that online, download it, put it on your computer. The source then that you use on your Zoom feed, instead of using your camera as the source that's connected over USB, you would use the OBS Studio, and that then whatever is being streamed out of OBS Studio is what is seen on Zoom. And then you can record that event as well in Zoom. And one quick side note, Zoom recording does allow, with a paid for account, some recording directly to the cloud. So you want to look into those things, obviously, with the type of account you have, how much space you have. But getting back to OBS Studio, it's a little trickier. You need to have somebody who is going to kind of be the quote unquote director of that event. They're going to sit there with a camera, with their laptop, and coordinate which camera it sees is shown into the video. But it allows you to have multiple cameras, and it makes for a more interesting stream of the live event. We did this in particular at these 2 lodge rededications because during the pandemic, a lot of older brothers wanted to take part in the rededications, but didn't feel comfortable coming and being there in person. And it also allowed for brethren who didn't want to travel in from out of state, older brethren, to at least take part and be there for the rededication service ceremony. And that it's a great tool. It's definitely outside of the scope of what we're doing here this morning, but it's something that if you're interested in, that there is information online, and if you would like to, you can always contact me directly, and I can point you in the direction of how we went about doing it. It is fantastic, and it gives you a real professional result. And that concludes my demonstration.
Thanks for spending time with XLCR32. The experiences, comments, opinions, and views shared on this program are those of individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, Concordant, or Pendant body. Until we meet again, keep on reaching higher.